Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode of Why Should I Trust You? We have a big guest for you today. Neil deGrasse Tyson is joining us along with filmmaker Scott Hamilton Kennedy. There just isn't a more recognizable figure in science today than Neil deGrasse Tyson. Astronomer, thinker, author, filmmaker, advocate, the guy has single-handedly popularized science. So we want to talk to him today, not so much about the cosmos, but what's going on with us humans right here on Earth, like right now. Why is trust breaking down in all the things he embodies? And how do we get it back? Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Brenda Adhikari.
I am Tom Johnson.
I am Dr. Mark.
I'm Maggie Bartlett.
So like we said, we have a really big guest. I don't think Neil deGrasse Tyson needs much of an intro, but let's do some quick basics.
Let's not let that stop us.
Let's not let that stop us. Neil's an astronomer. He's director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City, which my kids love to go to. And he is the author of something like 20 books with a long list of bestsellers in which he makes complex astrophysical concepts understandable or somewhat understandable. He's a speaker, thinker, evangelist for all things science, the scientific method, and really the wonders of exploring the scientific frontier. And he has teamed up with Oscar-nominated filmmaker Scott Hamilton Kennedy. And together, these two partnered on two films, which we're going to talk about. You guys should really check them out. Shot in the Arm, which is all about vaccines and mistrust, as well as Food Evolution, which dives deep into GMOs, genetically modified organisms, genetically engineered food, and you guessed it, mistrust. So we're all kind of thinking on the same wavelength. And we've done the conversation, and I gotta admit, I was fangirling a little bit. It was not every day you have somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson on, Mark. It was a great conversation.
Just to hear him and their perspectives, especially how they go through this movie and how the movie came about. And they started it at a time when COVID wasn't even on the radar. And then COVID came
Right.
in and completely changed the narrative. One thing that struck me in the movie was they said something like, I thought that the arrival of COVID would be the end of the anti-science world. And then the narrator says, "Were you right?" And they said, "I was never so wrong in my life." So it just really it goes through this journey that we've all been on.
Yeah, and the Shot in the Arm film, they started filming it in 2019. So the timing is just nuts. I think they thought they were doing a film about measles and an outbreak of measles, and then all of a sudden COVID happens. And then, of course, for the food film, this idea of vaccines and food have all come to a head in the MAHA movement. So it was really prescient and really interesting, kind of unpack what they learned, and empathy for people's points of view, and sort of a call to come back to scientific method as the way that we're going to kind of work our way through this.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's
on
just
this
so
show,
honest.
like we so often we have these conversations where we're really trying to understand different perspectives. And on this one, look, they have a pretty strong perspective, and they're definitely shining a light on anti-science and folks who are really trying to weaponize and some bad faith actors. But they're also using empathy in their storytelling to not, demonize people for having hesitation and skepticism around whether it's vaccines or having concerns about pesticides in their food. But anyway, it was a great conversation. So without further ado, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Scott Hamilton Kennedy. It is such a pleasure to welcome Neil deGrasse Tyson and Scott Hamilton Kennedy to Why Should I Trust You? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah.
So look, as we said, there are about an infinite number of ways we could introduce Neil, but we want to give a shout out for two films that he made in partnership with filmmaker extraordinaire, Oscar-nominated Scott Hamilton Kennedy, Shot in the Arm, which you can find free on pbs.org, and Food Evolution, and if you go to foodevolutionmovie.com, you'll find it there. Please check them out. They're excellent films. It's so great to have you. So look, I want to Neil, start with you. Talk to me about these two films. What were you hoping to sort of achieve in taking on these two quite divisive issues in our country today? Where we stand on genetically modified organisms and food, and also vaccines.
Yeah. So first of all, I was just minding my own business in my office, and Scott Kennedy found me. I mean, I didn't look for him. He saw that I cared about what is objectively true on the scientific landscape. And he was tackling these subjects that are, they're divisive, not because they should be, but because people are ignorant and they choose sides based on that ignorance. And I spend a lot of my time and effort and energy in the public space trying to untangle what might be ways that people are trying to understand the world. And I come to it from sort of more harmless directions. There are people who think Earth is flat, or that, Mars and Mercury in retrograde really matters in their life. And so, the patient doesn't die when this goes on. Scott, however, is in the trenches when he's talking about GMOs and the fervor with which people are choosing sides on that topic. And of course, vaccines, the follow-on project. So when he asked if I would participate, I said, I don't have specific expertise in these fields, other than as an educator, I care about the authenticity and the veracity, the integrity of the science that's communicated. And we were completely aligned on that. And so in the first one, I was narrator, and I also served as an educational consultant. In the second one, Scott narrated it, which is great because as the filmmaker, it became a first-person story of his journey trying to find what's going on in the minds of vaccine deniers. And as a result, the film took on a whole other tone. It wasn't preachy. It was, this isn't his exploration, and it's sensitive to people who are vaccine hesitant because some of them have been duped, and you can't blame the victim on that. You have to sort of know how to approach it. So I was delighted to participate in that project, not as narrator. And I didn't take offense that whether he didn't like my voice.
How is that possible?
Yeah.
So it was not about that. It was about what I could add in my advice as an educator.
Well, Scott, tell us a little bit about Shot in the Arm. It was a really personal story. I mean, your family was in it. I was so moved by certain scenes of your daughters. Tell us what went through your mind, what your intention was in making this film.
Sure. Well, it started, as you see in the film, it started innocently as a film exploring why we were having record-breaking measles outbreaks in 2019, a year before COVID, and looking at what were the causes of that, where we had elimination status in 2000 in the United States. Around why were we seeing outbreaks of measles, state of emergency in New York City. And the first person I reached out to was Dr. Paul Offit at Children's Hospital, Philadelphia. And he said quite simply, Scott, it's not very complicated. There are people out there that have come to be known as anti-vaxxers who scare parents, mostly mothers, into not vaccinating their children. And it's never a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to see if measles vaccine rates go down, you're going to see outbreaks of measles. So we thought we had a pretty important story in that, and we had wonderful doctors and scientists to follow on that, including Dr. Fauci before he became Super Fauci, and as well as some of the original anti-vaxxers, Dr. Wakefield and his fraudulent detracted study, and Del Bigtree, as well as now the top of the pyramid, Robert Kennedy Jr. back in 2019, who was already in a powerful place, and now we know he's in a dangerously powerful place as the head of HHS. So all of that was the movie in its beginning in 2019, and then COVID happened, and it went to this other place. At first, we were wondering, are we going to have a movie? Because shouldn't a once in a century pandemic help everybody to line up behind science to try and do the best? Clearly, that's not what happened, and it got much more complicated from there. And that's the only reason that I put myself as the narrator and put my family into the film, was because of lockdown, and to try and get a little bit of the all of us sense, that, having that relationship with the all of us and seeing each other on that, because probably my favorite subtext of the entire film is the social contract. What responsibilities do we have inherently and with consciousness of how we want to relate to each other?
Neil, that social contract and our relationship to science, like if you step back and look at sort of where we are right now, it seems that, people are sort of saying, hey, like I care about your child and and I care about the health of your child, and maybe your child can't be vaccinated because they're immune compromised, but I don't want to risk my child. Like I've got a responsibility to my child. And there's a little bit of like sort of this new sort of individual ethos going on right now where we're maybe not all in this together. And I'm just wondering if you step back and you look at that, I'm just wondering if you could diagnose it a little bit for us and just sort of as a species, like how dangerous is that if we all start to kind of go our own route?
Yeah, again, as an educator, I can't analyze it as a physics, astrophysics, physical sciences educator. I'm not the person to analyze this psychologically. But what I can say is, as a species, we are awful at understanding probability and statistics. And I don't know, I don't want to blame anybody for that. If you look at all the great branches of mathematics, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, all of those branches, algebra, all of those branches of math predate the first time anyone decided to take an average of numbers and decide that that would be something useful to do.
Really?
That didn't happen until the 1700s, when all these other great branches of math predated that. So thinking statistically and probabilistically is simply not intuitive. Otherwise, I think it would have shown up in the math portfolio way earlier. As a result, we are much more influenced by personal testimony. I know someone who got the vaccine and this happened to them, therefore I'm not. Meanwhile, a bar chart would show them that 99 whatever percent is good, and the little bit where it is bad, that happens to be your best friend, and that's what's influencing you. It's hard to overcome that. I don't want to say it's impossible, but I will say it's hard. And that's what empowers the individual to think that they're making the right decision based on their individual life experience or the individual intuitions.
A little more cynical on that, if I could
Yeah.
jump in on. It's an add-on to that. It was a bit of a perfect storm that's led to, excuse me, it's been a bit of a perfect storm that's led to the acceptance of selfishness, not a nice word, so it's best I can do today, that there was correct skepticism of government and big companies and things like that, that led to cynicism and people manipulating that truth to make it worse. But then really the explosion of the internet and kind of designing your own truth and your own communication tool to that truth that was a confirmation bias nightmare. So it's kind of been a perfect storm that's led to us. I don't know why we're living in a time that selfishness is almost celebrated. And it's like, it's been okay to say that I can determine my own truth and what's best for my family is celebrated. I don't know why that is, but it is a problem.
I'd like to add, if you go back to the early days of vaccines, more than 100 years ago, there was an anti-vaccine movement where there were these cartoon illustrations of people turning into a cow after having received the vaccine derived for cowpox to stop smallpox, of course. And so a lot of misinformation at that time. The difference is those people didn't have the internet. So whatever was the extent of that information was kind of limited to whoever had direct contact with the people who weren't thinking straight. Today, if you create a platform with clickbaity commentary and here's one, you ready? The experts will tell you this is true, but I know better. Here is what they're not telling you. Boom, you're clicking on it. And that's irresistible to not go with the statistical average because we don't know what that is as a species. And it's why casinos are in business at all. The full exploitation of our inability to think probabilistically and statistically about the world.
Like we're not wired to do that?
What's that?
We're not wired to do that?
I think we're wired to not think statistically and probabilistically.
Yeah.
So you have to overcome that, which is why casinos make money off of us gleefully. And we gleefully give them our money to do so.
Yeah.
That's a weird fact.
But it can't be all, I mean, misinformation obviously is like, a major thing at play right now in social media and the algorithms and all those things. But do you think there's something else going on where people are feeling sort of this break from science lately? Like science somehow let them down, or modern life has scared them such that they're looking for new answers and new solutions to things? I mean, you
I
make the
have a
point.
hypothesis.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
like to put
please.
it out there. In the 1960s, you didn't find this anti-science sentiment. Why? Again, this is my hypothesis, but I think it's a strong one. We were going to the moon. We were in competition with godless commies over on the other side of the world, and we were going to the moon, and everybody knew that required the best and brightest of us to take engineering and science to frontiers it had never breached before. That was a visible goal that trickled down through the media, through our school systems, through our entertainment. What else would we have a primetime cartoon series called The Jetsons, for example? Okay, the influence as it reaches into pop culture cannot be understated in what role it played in people's embracing of science. Today, and by the way, at the time, there are always movies where science goes bad, but that in the entertainment sci-fi sphere. So it's that I don't want to implicate that because that was going on at the same time, and people knew the difference. Today, there's no single great scientific goal that galvanizes a population, and we get complacent in the science that is delivered to us. So they're saying, I don't like science. Oh, wait, I have a call on my smartphone, right, from someone in Europe while I'm walking down the street. And they hang up the call. See, science, I don't like science. So there's a disconnect here, which makes me worry that maybe science needs public service announcements daily to remind you of what life would be like without the science that you now take for granted. That's a shame. The Apollo program was its own public service announcement because it was visible achievements and advances, if not weekly, certainly monthly. In that
Right.
every mission was more ambitious than the next. So I hate to say, scientists need to retain an ad agency because that's kind of sleazy when you think about it. That's like really sleazy, but maybe that's what we need.
So I didn't want to be visible at all. Brenda knows this, Tom knows this, Mark knows this, and now I'm a co-host on a podcast. I'm a scientist and I'm doing this. Neil, you've obviously inspired millions to take interest in physics, space, critical thinking, and there's clearly a need for scientists to kind of follow in this path, but there's not really a framework. What would you say? And Scott, too, your films, I know we were talking about them during grad school. GMO was a hot topic in research labs. But what do you say to this next generation that is facing all of these like tremendous hurdles in research funding and what they should be doing in communicating what they do?
Yeah, I think I'm a realistic cynic in that regard. Uh, so I have colleagues who have gotten phone calls from England and France saying, your funding is drying up there. We could use you over here. Now you think about it, that's what we did for most of the 20th century. We had the best science programs, the best science funding. So the best and the brightest around the world came to the United States. Let's call them science immigrants. By the way, 1/3 of all the Nobel Prizes in sciences in that have gone to Americans have gone to immigrants to America.
Mm.
1/3 of them. Just think about that, right? So that meant we've been skimming the world for this. Now that our science funding is dropping, the world will start skimming us. And so my cynical part of this is the United States historically has been very good at reacting to challenges rather than proactively avoiding a challenge. And the reactive part means you have to fall low before you can rise up again. I see us falling much lower since we are now only 7 months into this administration, and the budget cutting wand is pointing in all directions and growing. That we might have to sink lower for the country to wake up to the consequences of these thoughts and attitudes while the rest of the world passes us by. And then we'll say, oh my gosh, let us align and reclaim our scientific preeminence that I grew up with. And I even took for granted a little. I say, of course, doesn't everyone value science this much? I visit another country. No, they don't. They don't even think about it. They just care that their coffee is the right temperature in the morning. Okay? So, of course, I'm stereotyping there, but that's I remembered thinking, how come no one else has this curiosity the way we do in America? I was taking it for granted. I said, yes, that's what everybody is like. Everybody's not like that. It takes active investments. It takes active reminders. And we should all be glad that people like Scott exist on this earth, because that it's a medium. The documentary is a medium to get a message out there that's not just someone preaching on a YouTube page. It lives there in the catalog for people to taste.
Yeah. I want to ask Scott something and then follow up with Neil on a slightly different direction. But Scott, I want to pick up on something you said about just the concept of sort of selfishness and the social contract. And I want to kind of offer maybe a slightly different take based on some of our conversations we've had with a lot of Make America Healthy Again folks. I don't know if you guys know this, but we moderate these conversations between folks from MAHA and MAGA and people in science. And Neil, if you ever want to join in, let me know, because they sure would, I think, love to have a conversation. And I will say that I'm never left thinking that like selfishness is like the main reason why maybe they have some hesitation. So much of it and I think part of what we're trying to do is also show that there's a spectrum of folks who have concerns about vaccines, that there's certainly, I think there are folks who are very much like anti, but then there's also, I think, a huge part of this country that were kind of pro-vax, and then COVID happened, and just statistically from Gallup and from KFF, it shows that there was a huge drop-off in trust in vaccines after COVID, and we can argue about what caused that and things like that, but I just offer just this thought that, there's so many questions about just the vaccine schedule, for instance, about why there are so many shots at one time, that I don't put them in the category of being like malicious, pumping supplements. These are folks who are independent thinkers who, a lot of them, certainly go on Facebook and all those things, but they're not all kind of awash in the same sort of swamp as I think one may have the impression of. And I think that is real. I just want to be very clear about that. But I just want to offer that out there, Scott, that some of that, I think, is this notion of individual liberty and medical freedom that has really taken hold in this country. Absolutely. But a lot of it isn't. And I think that group also really needs to be reckoned with in some ways.
Well, that point was made in the film. Scott made a very big priority to recognize and distinguish the fact that, first of all, liberals were the OG anti-vaxxers on grounds that they were completely duped by the spurious research on it, with its non-connection to autism. But they're the OG anti-vaxxers. And then in the Trump era, you have the freedom, and you can't tell me. So it's the government can't inject in me without my consent kind of attitude. And they meet on the same side of the fence, turning anti-vax communities into purple communities rather than red and blue. So yes, they require different solutions, different pedagogical approaches to gain access to their decision making. It's not a one size fits all. And Scott knew that.
Did you want to weigh in on that? And then I want to ask Neil another follow-up.
Absolutely. And and Neil pointed this out earlier, is having empathy. Empathy was a huge part of how we approached Shot in the Arm, having empathy for everybody that has a concern, everybody that is skeptical.
Yeah, the film wouldn't have worked without it. It would have just been a blowhard anti-vax statement, but it was very sensitive. Yes.
Appreciate that. And I appreciate that you all are taking that into the work, that's beautiful work that you guys are doing, and trying to see people, hear the nuance. Nuance is such a beautiful word. The place that I just still bump on is, do we have the humility to pause if we have skepticism about the vaccines, right? Completely fine, skeptical point of view. But if you have evidence over and over again that says that your concern about that is not supported by evidence, but you keep going down that road, I don't know what to call that, right? I don't know what to call that other than selfishness. So,
but Scott's evidence scientifically would be statistical in almost every case. Their quote evidence is anecdotal. Correct. And so it's a matter of, again, getting people to understand the difference between testimony, impassioned testimony of an individual, and a dispassionate plot of what you should do and how it should affect your behavior.
That's the only question I have right now. So the only question I want to ask of Robert Kennedy Jr., the press to ask of Robert Kennedy Jr., is what tools can we use to have a 12-year-old decide if what you're saying and what the scientific, well, I can't say the scientific community anymore.
Why not?
The evidence around vaccines is saying and what you're saying. How do we determine which one to listen to? And it has to go beyond cleverness and confirmation bias, but that takes a lot of work. It's
Right.
much easier to say, I like what he's saying, what Robert Kennedy Jr. is saying about this. It goes to the way I want to see the world, and I'm going to keep going down that road.
And he keeps saying he's our advocate, right? That he keep you building, and he has a long history of that. So, so he's your hero, right?
And there's
Yeah.
babies, there's people that
And
are
look,
dead
this
because
is like this is the universe that we exist in. These are the people that we speak with very closely, and so we hear very often about why they're drawn to him. But I want to move on to one thing. Neil, you were on Joe Rogan's show about a year ago, and it was a really interesting episode to sort of get at this idea of agreeing on a set of facts and agreeing on how we talk about science. And I want to play for you, it's about 1.5 minutes, a clip, and then I want to talk to you about kind of what you were trying to do here with Joe. Okay, here we go.
Are you familiar with one of the most famous cases was a case with Commander David Fravor of the Navy, who encountered with one or two other jets off of the Nimitz. They encountered this thing that was shaped like a Tic Tac.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know the story.
Everybody knows this, yeah.
This story. It went from, they tracked it going from 80,000 feet above sea level to 50 in less than a second. They have no idea how it moved. There's no visible propulsion system.
Mm-hmm.
It was blocking their radar. It was actively blocking tracking.
This is what their sensors told them.
Exactly.
Just be clear about that.
And then
you're stating information as though it is facts.
I'm stating information as Commander Fravor
I don't care.
related.
That doesn't matter. He's human,
Right.
and we're all human here. But as a scientist, when you're presenting information, you don't say, this thing was at 80,000 feet and it dropped to zero to sea level in 1 second, or whatever it was the measure. That's the wrong way to report it. What you say is, we have sensors that told us this is what happened.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay?
Yes.
That's a very important distinction.
Yes.
And so now, all right, your first question then, tell me about the sensors.
Yeah.
Okay. Are they double checked? Are they, and so, but if you're just going to say there's this craft at 80,000, then everyone is thinking about a craft and no one is thinking about the sensor.
So, Neil, you heard that.
That was good. I like that. Forgot all about that.
It holds up.
So look, I just realized that people might know, like, they were talking about UFOs, and clearly Joe is UFO curious, and I think wanted to make the point that, there was this pilot that was seeing something, and that therefore one could, believe his conclusion. And so, Neil, talk to me about what you were trying to get across.
Let's start in a simple case, okay? And I do this with people who work around me. They'll come in, they'll say, oh, the office is cold, or it's hot, or it's hot outside, or it's cold. And I say, what you really mean is, I feel cold, or I feel hot in this environment. To say it is hot or it is cold is a statement that is not an objectively verifiable statement. What is objectively verifiable is that you feel cold or you feel hot. And that's a very it's a micro example of how people will confuse their response function to a stimulus to what the actual stimulus might be. And that's what I was trying to get across there in the Joe. See, I thought you were going to show the clip. I thought you were going to air the clip where you try to get me to take drugs. That's a whole other conversation.
I don't.
That we had.
Wait.
Listen,
that one.
Oh, you missed that one. Oh, yeah. What I told him, it's partially related here. I told him, he said, why don't you do psychedelics? I said, the human brain barely works as it is. And I value objective reality. You want me to take a chemical, stir it into my brain, and somehow think that brings me closer to nature? I don't think so. So no, I'm not doing your hallucinogenics, your psychedelics.
Our show is about trust. And as you know, at this point, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how do you trust people when you're, I've been wrong before. I think it was even in the movie, Dr. Offit says, like, I was wrong and I'm admitting I was wrong. And he makes a distinction between so many other groups. And then at the same time, how do I look at trust from like a scientific lens? Is it something that like exists like outside of the realm of science, or is it like part of science? Can I learn how to trust? Like, how do you feel about that as an educator? You said
that's a brilliant question, and the answer is subtle. So give me a second to sort of figure out how to best say this. Trust comes from the knowledge that someone is not lying to you. That's different from whether or not the person is correct. Okay? The two different levels of trust here. If I know that you are telling me the truth, even if the truth is false, that's a level of trust. So what was it Offit who I think what he should have said was not that, yeah, I was wrong. Well, sorry, we did capture this in a later edit that is the final edit. It's not simply that he was wrong. He was basing his argument on available evidence. And what should have happened in retrospect, and this is not just Monday morning quarterback. I knew this at the time, and more educationally enlightened people should have done this. We have a novel virus. We don't have research in the bank to tell us how this is going to unfold. So the head of the CDC or the Surgeon General, somebody, not the president, somebody with academic chops and medical chops should have weekly said, this week, this is what research tells us. And that is our advice. But it is changing, it is evolving rapidly. And we will report back to you in a week to see if that advice remains or whether we will amend it with other things you should be doing. And if I come back in a week and I say, a new research paper came out and found that, okay, children are not badly affected by this. They're not going to die, and they're not going to spread it the way we thought. And it's just going to be a mild flu. So no, we should not close down schools, even though 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we thought we should. So then you reopen the schools. All right. And so that's trust. That's trust. And it's not whether I'm right all the time. No. Not only that, when the media reports science, they never include the uncertainties that are in the actual research papers. But they should. They learn how to do that with polling results. The polling margin of error is 3 points. Okay? When we were growing up, they never reported that. They gave the number like it was the number. And if you were behind by 1 point, you were going to lose. No, there was uncertainties there and you might win. So it's not an impossible idea to convey that there are uncertainties in any scientific result. So to me, trust is you're not lying to me. You're being honest with what you know. And trust is not about authority. Well, at least it shouldn't be. This is part of the problem with UFO reporting. They'll say, this person is a major, a captain in the Air Force, and he's flown 100 missions. Therefore, you can trust him? No, that's why I said, is he human? Does he have a human brain? That's all you need to be fooled. Okay? So it's your self-awareness of what you're reporting and to be humble enough to recognize that it could change in a week and trust the public to be able to react in a sensible way in the face of that information. Scott, I cut you off.
Weigh in.
No, I love you to use the word humility. My problem with trust right now is that it's losing a confirmation bias battle again, not to repeat that, but that we're not having the humility to say, what should I trust based on evidence? Could my evidence be wrong? Can I go back and try and find the most verifiable evidence? It's, oh, my tribe is saying this, I'm going to believe that. This is the way I want to see the world. I've come to think that we've gone from a skeptical world to a cynical world, right? Skeptical is healthy. What's the evidence? Where are we? Should I be concerned about vaccines? But to a cynical world of saying, I can't trust anybody in science. I'm going to jump over to somebody new in science, like Robert.
Especially when it goes tribal.
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And all it is all science is a tool to try and find the truth. And it's going to change and it's going to adapt. And we as human beings are not good at, we think that we know the answers based on instinct and emotions and things like that. So we've also been smart enough to build things into science and even democracy to have checks and balances to try and correct the imperfections of our animal brain.
But another point of sensitivity here, which is important, I think, is what distinguishes vaccines from almost anything else is that most medicines you take after you have symptoms, so that you are in some lower state of health and you go to the doctor, they administer medicines, and then you get better. With vaccines, it is medicine given to a completely healthy person. And with the adverse reactions fraction of any vaccine, some of those people will have an adverse reaction. Oh my gosh, I was completely healthy this morning, and now I'm not. You did it to me. It's really hard to convince someone otherwise that vaccines are good for the world when it affects them that way. And so I think that's a point of empathy or sympathy one needs to have to people who then suffer from an adverse reaction to the vaccine.
Yeah, Neil,
people who are not looking at the broader statistics, which is, if I catch COVID, what will my health be then? What are the chances of catching COVID? What are the chances I have an adverse reaction? Again, we're not thinking probabilistically about it.
What are the chances that I pass it on to somebody who's more vulnerable than me? That's another big part of vaccine. Is it just
very
me?
big part? Yeah.
Neil, you wrote, I pulled this quote from Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. You said, science is not just about seeing, it's about measuring, preferably with something that's not your own eyes, which are inextricably conjoined with the baggage of your brain. And that baggage is more often than not a satchel of preconceived ideas, post-conceived notions, and outright bias.
Well, that's I wrote that. That's a good.
You wrote that, but it seems to apply to our fighter jet pilot seeing a UFO, or a mom who thinks food is impacting their child, with toxins. This kind of anecdotal observations as versus trusting the scientific method. I mean, just could you unpack that and explain that a little bit more?
I have sympathy in these cases. Consider that science itself, as practiced today, did not really start until like the 1600s, where you have an hypothesis, an experiment. The idea had floated as early as the golden age of Islam. There were people who wrote about this, and Leonardo even spoke about what role bias might play in your conclusions. So there were hints of what would need to be sort of become an organized activity. And so we've only had science for basically 400 years, given how long this species has been here. And what were we doing before science? It was anecdotal. It was tribal. What do I mean? If you're part of a culture that cleanses your hands every day before you eat, before you whatever, or if that's part of your culture, and you don't get sick and everyone else in the town gets sick, oh my gosh, you're responsible. You're not getting sick. You put a spell on everyone. Just think of the non-scientific ways our brain was trying to resolve how the world worked. Oh, we burn the witches. Okay. Oh, how come the witches didn't get the smallpox and everybody else did? Oh, actually, smallpox is carried by rats. Okay, and witches have women accused of being witches. They might have cats. Cats will eat the rats. But no one is the analysis isn't there. So I think it's an education problem. I know it's a cop-out answer because we can just offload everything to the educational system. We're teaching science as a satchel of facts and not a way of querying nature, a way of establishing what is objectively true from what isn't, a way of determining whether you are being fooled into thinking something is true that is not, or thinking something is not true that is. That's the only point of a scientific method, and that's not really taught. It isn't, even in the labs. You learn from your textbook, you memorize the bold-faced terms, you show up for the exam, and 6 months later, you retain 10% of it. It's a state of mind to do science. And once, as an educator, that's why I talk to the electorate. I have a huge following on social media. I don't think I've ever even mentioned Trump because it's not about Trump. It's about people's response to forces operating on them. And they are not, may I use the word, inoculated against people who otherwise don't know what they're saying.
You know, I think a lot about what you were saying before about an earlier era, Americans gathering around their television sets to watch, Man on the Moon. And I think about, the fact that I used to watch, Cosmos as a kid, whether it's at Sagan or you or whatever, right? And can science actually be the great equalizer, the great unifier in this moment? I mean, I will say that when we actually take away the issues and the outcomes that we're going to talk about science because we want you to get vaccinated. We're going to talk about science because we want your kids to eat. We're going to talk about, I just wonder, Neil and Scott, that does America, could we potentially just take a breath and be back to just being in a state of wonder and awe for a little bit about science? Can that actually potentially bring us to the table a little bit better to actually just focus on the science itself as opposed to putting it into a practical place? I hope that's not too kind of convoluted a question. Scott, do you want to take that first?
It goes, to draft off of what Neil was saying. It's well, first of all, how are we going to make science not political? That's a really hard one because people have made it political, and science doesn't care about your politics, doesn't care about what country you are, doesn't care about your race. So to reset that, we'll leave that to the side for a minute. But how can we re-educate us to just pause and say, what is science? And what is the scientific method? And am I using it? And the people I'm listening to using it as best they can? And an offshoot of that would be if you say you don't trust the science behind vaccines, but you're trusting the same science, same scientific institutions that check those things on another medication that you're taking, or the food that you're eating, or the brakes in your car, right? Where is the disconnect between what you trust in one situation and what you don't trust in another situation? It should be steady. What is the evidence? What is the best evidence that I have to determine that? So it's hard. That's the fight that is out of balance right now. That communication is out of balance right now. That it's so easy to throw cynical statements into the conversation, where it's much harder for the science to counter that with information. And we have to go back to a human connection, which you guys are doing beautifully on your show, is let's connect as human beings and then sneak in talking about the humility to use the scientific method.
Neil?
That's why I try to get to the base level of people's understanding of what science is and how and why it works, and why it's the most successful effort we have ever come up with to disentangle that which would otherwise be fooling us from that which is objectively true. And I would recast this and say, Scott, is there a documentary that's doable or realistic that can just have everyone celebrate science once again? Is it an overview of, or
Heard
is
it
it
here
a
first, folks. We just pitched to an Oscar-nominated filmmaker and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and they've accepted the pitch. A movie.
you know what it could be? It could
about the wonders of science. Go. When's it coming out?
Okay, so Scott, not a documentary. Make it a story of a family where every day or every week you remove some thing in their life that was created by scientific innovation and discovery. And then after a month, they're living in a cave.
It's a reality show.
No cell phones. No cell
All
phones.
right, reality show. There it is. I think one of those, just as a reminder that, oh my gosh, scientists actually do know what they're doing, and you are living greater than the greatest kings of centuries past because of it.
Would there be a control group, Neil?
Put me in the control group.
Yeah, I want to go with control group too.
On one note of hope, most of the people we speak with are on our show, and we have a pretty big network. They aren't anti-science. I just want to make that really clear. They're really not. And most of them, I think, would just sit in wonderment of things that Neil deGrasse Tyson says. And so part of it is also, I think, I'm so glad that you guys have raised the concerns to what the extreme of something could be. But I'm also excited to actually engage in meaningful discussions with these groups as opposed to the because that's not getting us anywhere. And so I'm really excited for the next phase of of moving the conversation along, because we're so entrenched with these communities. We really know where they're coming from in a lot of this stuff. And so I just want to put that there, that I don't know that most of them would need an object of their house to go away, because I think they're not but they have concerns about certain parts of things. And just to name it as opposed to just painting it all as anti-science, I think is also important.
Yeah, no, Neil, with your hopeful crystal ball hat, you've said a few things, and I want to ask you about the future of science. And this is, maybe things are different now than when you said them maybe a few years ago. But you said, we will develop a perfect antiviral serum and cure cancer. Medicines will tailor to your own DNA, leaving no adverse side effects. You said things like, we will cure all diseases and stop aging. The leading cause of death will be car accidents, unless we develop self-driving cars, which we kind of have. Or you said that neuroscience and our understanding of the human mind will become so advanced that mental illness will be cured, leaving psychologists and psychiatrists without jobs. Are we actually on that path? Where are you today on those kinds of thoughts?
So you're reading from my Cosmic Perspectives on Civilization book. Thank you for that shout out. Just for context, that was in a chapter called Science and Technology, where I showed the folly of what it is to try to make predictions 30 years into the future. And I go back 150 years and show how bad people are at getting it right. And I felt that I should not sit with hindsight and criticize the bad predictions everyone made unless I jumped into the mix and made predictions of my own, so that in 30 years, people can make fun of me. So that's why I included those predictions. That being said, I think we're well on our way. Neuroscience is making progress daily, weekly certainly, if not daily. The neural link connections, Elon was kind of a weird outlier at the time. That effort is growing. Now there's startups that are engaged in the brain-computer interface. So the idea that we would cure mental illness, by the way, that comes with its own moral issues, because if you go back only 40 years, the homosexuality was considered a mental illness. And so do you correct that because society has a social mores that declares that it's wrong? All right. So you can't just go full speed into that without tandem sensitivities to what it is to be human and what is the diversity of what it is to be human. So I want to make that clear. In terms of self-driving cars, yeah, we're already en route for that. And we still have 40,000 deaths a year, automotive deaths. That will drop to near zero when we have full self-driving capabilities, because a self-driving car can go 90 miles an hour behind another car that's going 90 miles an hour, and it can text and not lose attention because it's a computer, right? And it wants to change lanes. It tells the other cars, I want to change lanes. They part, it changes lanes. This is ready to happen. And designer drugs that cure. Yeah, that's not a new idea. And these are predictions I think that would hit by 2050 was the goal. So I'm still all in on them.
But what about like the headline this morning that RFK has just got $500 million for mRNA vaccine research? Like, do we have this golden age that's sort of in front of us that we could grab?
Yeah, another country will do it. That's the interesting thing about science. No country owns science. It transcends culture, religion, gender, politics. It transcends it. And I'm happy to report, while simultaneously sad to report, that many other countries of the world are valuing science greater than how we are currently valuing science. So I don't see this holding up scientific progress. Mm-hmm. The United States will regress on that landscape until we all wake the hell up and say, what hath we wrought here? We are dancing to the tunes played by other countries, and that is not the American habit. Certainly not post-Second World War, 20th century leaders and everything habit. So, yeah, like I said, we'll have to drop lower before we wake up and become scientifically woke. Am I allowed to use that word at all in any context?
You just did, friend.
You can do it.
I just did.
Well, listen, I want to thank Scott Hamilton Kennedy and Neil deGrasse Tyson for joining us on this special episode of Why Should I Trust You? Please do check out their films, Shot in the Arm and Food Evolution. We mentioned where you can find it. Do send us your questions and comments to questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net. I'm Brenda Adhikari. Well, first, let me thank Scott and Neil. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you. And just a note about your title. Don't trust me because I carry pedigree or authority of title. Trust me because I made sense to you. And I had a comment and an argument that you say, oh, that makes, oh, I understand now. Yes. That's why you should trust me, not for any other reason.
Okay, you just answered this thing that we do on many shows. We didn't do it today, where we ask our guests, why should our listeners trust you? So you preempted
you just did it.
Thanks, Neil, for answering that.
There you go.
I'm Brenda Adhikari. He is Tom Johnson. He's Dr. Mark. She's Maggie Bartlett. And we will see you right back here on Thursday.